Everyone, welcome back to 2 Hours on a Sunday. I'm Brian,
I'm Ian.
and today we are diving into the 2014 masterpiece that is Christopher Nolan's Interstellar.
Interstellar.
I don't know about you, Ian, but this movie has been, and will forever be in my top 10 of all time.
Oh yeah, it's so
And I
good.
think it's bridging on top 5, but there's so many good ones now that it's hard to really push it there. But this will always, after watching it, it's cutting close to top 5.
I've been sleeping on it for a while because I haven't watched it since maybe a year or two after it came out, and like I just always knew in my head it's like up there, and then you see all the other stuff, but then yeah, rewatching it for this, I'm like, wow, I forgot how good this hits.
I watched it the first time on Blu-ray. I didn't see this in theaters because I
Oh, I
wasn't
didn't even know that.
big on
Okay.
movies then. I didn't really hop into movies like hardcore. Like I'd see the usual with you, the Marvel movie.
But yeah, it wasn't.
But I watched it on Blu-ray first last night. We watched it in 4K. We rented it in 4K because I have the 4K TV now. And let me tell you, the visuals alone, I was like,
The it's like
oh my gosh.
so crisp and so like even just a simple shot, just like stuff in the space station just looks so good with the lighting and the shadows. Yeah.
To go off of that, I'm going to tell you a fun fact that this movie, this rendered scenes was 800 terabytes.
Oh, geez. I
That's
mean,
800,000 gigabytes.
yeah, I'd believe it because there's just so much. But geez,
And then one scene took 100 hours to render.
is that the black hole one?
I
Yeah,
believe it's the
because I
black hole one.
remember reading that they like something about the producers of the advisor made them promise they would use like actual scientific evidence, and so in order
Yeah.
to do that, they had to create these algorithms that just were insane amounts of data.
And this movie actually furthered
Yeah, yeah, they
science.
actually
Like,
were able to use that out like the
yeah.
renderings they did to show the most realistic representation of certain things, which is
Yeah.
crazy.
So it's like they gave NASA more tools.
You know your movie is good when you're actually
Yeah.
making scientific breakthroughs at the same time.
They had to have all this stuff rendered because behind the scenes for all the actors, it's kind of like how they shot the Batman with all
Oh, I didn't
the
even know they
panels.
had the panels like
They
Mandalorian
had the panel
style.
so
Yeah.
actors can actually see what they're looking at. So like all the scenes of like them going around Saturn and like the black hole, all that stuff's being played for them on the outside, so they actually can get immersed, which is crazy to have all that stuff planned out.
Because he's so into practical stuff that he
Yeah,
would want to have that, but I didn't realize that it was even an option at that point in time that the technology was doing that.
I mean Christopher Nolan, he's
Yeah, he made it happen. Yeah, he's not going to accept a green screen for that. He needs
this guy comes out every couple years and he just delivers every
yeah.
time.
Every time it's like, oh, you guys thought that that was all I could do. Turns out it's not.
And every time he makes a film, and we're going to start with this, he calls up Hans Zimmer.
Yes.
Me and you have talked about this in Christopher Nolan films that sometimes if you're not in the theater and you're watching on your TV, it's so hard to hear the dialogue, and then when to turn up the volume and when to lower the volume. And with this, the way he used soundtrack and the way he used no soundtrack at all.
Yeah, the lack of sound in space is always something that I've loved in any sort of medium, and he just used it so good here. Even like the diegetic mixing of the music, and like the music cuts out and fades back in, and like the way that all the rest of the sound, like it's the one scene in particular where the airlock's blown and the sound comes back in as the atmosphere comes in. It's just like it adds to the tension of the moment, even though it's actually what's happening in the scene. It's almost scored that way to build that tension on top of the scene as well.
The theme song for this, I find he always has amazing themes that he composes for these films. Like him and Hans Zimmer I don't know how they did it, but I think this one, Hans had no script. It was like one page and he had to come up with the stuff. I think that was the movie I was reading that
Yeah.
he just came up with his own thing for the film, but it has like, it's a combination of like outer worldly sound, but like tension at the same time. It has that like, that ding.
He's good with that in some of the other films too, but especially in this one, yeah, it's not just a song. It has that like the environmental aspects built into the score, and you can feel the tension rising just by the way that the things like, and not the typical way where like you hear more instruments added or it goes faster. Like it feels intense, and you just get that right in here.
Soundtrack aside, the fact that he managed to create a movie about basically space and time travel and, intergalactic travel through black holes and
Hmm.
trying to move
Yeah,
humanity.
extremely heavy concepts.
You have the most incredible father-daughter relationship
Hmm.
that's
Yeah,
built at the beginning, like throughout the whole movie. You're like, you have this outer worldly concept, but then you have it so grounded with the
yeah,
fact that
and
Murph is the whole soul of the film, right? Her relationship with Coop.
the way that they thread it throughout, like they have the whole core of it in to start, and then when you keep cutting back and forth, you realize that you're learning more about it as you get to, and then you get the payoff at the end.
So to start with Act One, I loved them opening on the bookcase.
Yeah.
The very first shot of the film is that tight shot on the little spacecraft toy that she has.
Hmm. The lander that's going to kick everything off.
I love the idea. As I was watching this, I was like, this is so genius to have the way the ghost, the communication of the ghost is portrayed through a bookcase, like a bookshelf. And that's how we communicate, like through language. Book is all language, right?
Yeah, we're passing on stories. We're passing on. Yeah,
It's so simple. It's just a wall of books, and it's like, okay, you're being fed information through information that you can easily pick off the shelf and read. And I was like, that's such a simple and genius idea for a concept of communication through time. Because books are kind of timeless, right? You can read them.
yeah. It doesn't matter when they could have been written hundreds of years ago, and you pick it up, and the information can be just as relevant. And so it does fit into that same sort of thing where he's not viewing time in the end as a linear process, but all at once. And that's what you can do when you read these stories.
I love the scene when he goes into the school and the teacher's like telling him about the textbooks and now that she's reading the wrong textbooks.
Have they've revised it to, yeah, eliminate all these things. Like we thought that conspiracy theories were taking over. Like this is the entire world is just
Yeah.
decided that no, this is how it's going to be, and they're just changing things as they are.
And in a way it kind of foreshadows the plot because she's talking about how that's old information and they're trying to hide they're updating it so that they're removing information, and this whole movie essentially is about time, but then the second half of the movie is all about lies.
The information that we've hid to try and cover up a greater truth. And the same thing, they're not taking it out of the textbook because they really don't believe it happened. They're taking it out because they need the people to believe that this is the way you have to live.
And it goes into the baseball scene where we really see it in full force of them having to like deal with this. Like there's no panic, right, for Matthew McConaughey's crew. They're just like, okay, we have to get out of here, let's go back home, put your masks on, and let's, yeah, it's pretty much light. But then we start to build the relationship with the bedroom, right?
Hmm.
They go upstairs because he's like, oh, did you close the window? And Murph's like, oh my god, I forgot to close the window. And they run upstairs and there's dust everywhere, but then they see, all the dust settled in lines, right? And they're trying to figure it out. And that's when we start to develop the plot of, Matthew McConaughey and his daughter Murph are sitting there and they're trying to figure out what this even means. And they flick the coin and it's like, it's not, it's gravity. Like we introduce gravity as part of the plot, right? And he figures out it's not,
Yeah,
it's
he's like it's
binary.
something. Yeah.
This is where the mystery really kicks off because he finally writes down the coordinates and he takes off and then he tells Murph to stay, but obviously she tags along. She hides in the truck and he finds her and he's like, "All right, make yourself useful." She
Yeah.
breaks open the map, but they get to the gate and they end up it's a closed off fence and like okay, he tells Murph to stay in there. He's like, "I'm gonna
It
go do
looks
this." She's like,
abandoned.
"Yeah, it looks abandoned." They go up. She's like, "Well, you did bring the bolt cutters, right?" And he's like, That's
Yeah,
my girl."
it's my
And so
girl.
he's about to go up to it, and all of a sudden, lights are shining everywhere. And this is where we first meet Tars.
I don't even think I realized it until the second time I watched it. I thought it was just a person. I'm like, oh no, crap, that was Tars, like
Yeah,
being the
because we
guard.
don't see him right away, right? We just hear
Yeah,
the
you just see the
voice.
lights.
Yeah, and then the truck gets pulled in, and we find out that NASA has a hidden base underground. Someone has been calling to Matthew McConaughey, like they've been trying to communicate, and he doesn't know what's going on.
It is. I kind of liked how like you because you don't know it's NASA, you don't know who they are. You're like, oh, is this like some sort of like black ops CIA group who's going to interrogate him and like he's going to be in like huge trouble, and that's why like it's an inside joke for them. They're like, we're not going to waterboard you. We're NASA.
Because he used to fly for them. He used to
Yeah.
fly, right? So he had that going for him. But it's like you meet Professor Brand and his daughter. They have this hidden space shuttle. They have two plans. They have Plan A and Plan B. Plan
Hmm.
A is to find an inhabitable planet in the outer reach of space through a black hole to
Yeah.
reach another galaxy. And the Plan A is to bring the people
on Earth
on Earth
there.
to that planet. And plan B is they have a bunch of stored specimens in order to grow
Yeah,
humans.
they've essentially created their own diverse genetic pool of embryos that are ready to be grown on this planet that should like create a population that will not just self implode.
It's
So
supposed to be planned. That's really the plan that they're trying to go with.
yeah,
But we don't find that out till later.
and that's the crux of the of Act Three, which we'll get to.
The Dr. Brand is the classic, he's in every Christopher Nolan film,
Michael Caine.
Michael Caine, and he convinces Cooper, Matthew McConaughey,
Hmm.
he convinces him that you were brought here for a reason. This is your
Yeah,
purpose to fly this mission. And what I love them, I love when Matthew McConaughey does this, when he is really up close and personal with somebody, and he's giving them a speech, but he's like looking away from them, and then his final line that he wants to deliver, he looks them dead in the eye. Like I don't know if you noticed this when
I've
you
never
watch
really
it,
noticed
but
that
it's
before.
he
No.
does that a lot in movies when he has a speech and he's saying lines and he's walking towards them, but when he really wants them to listen to him for his final whatever he's saying, he looks them straight in the eye and says da 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 whatever he's gonna say,
Hmm.
and he just crushes it. And that's how they end the scene. And he's like, if I'm gonna
Yeah,
do this, we got to know that there's a chance for me to come home and all this other stuff, and that this is actually possible. And so at this point, we get the whole
that's when he starts to
plot of
explain everything, and I kind of liked how he set it up, where because like Brant, Professor Brant knows that there is some other entity out there
yeah,
that exists, and so when he says, "No, you brought here for a reason," he actually is talking about the fact that there is some other beings. But Matthew McConaughey doesn't know that yet. Coop is just like thinking that
yeah,
he's talking about the generic sort of like your destiny is here, and that's when they're like, What do you mean they brought me here?" And that's when it kind of turns the knife a little bit. Like, what do you mean? There's something else out there?
right, that we don't know about, right?
Hmm.
And this is when we finally get tension between him and Murph
Hmm.
because they drive home and Murph runs into the house and she doesn't want him to go because I think she knows
Yeah,
deep down that he's not coming back.
yeah, and she knows that this is her fault. Not her fault, but like she has talked about the ghost. They found the thing. He never would have gone there if it wasn't for her.
The fact that she figured out the message of what the bookcase was trying to tell her, and
Hmm.
it said stay, and she's like, the message said stay, and he doesn't believe her, and we'll get into it at the end because it's the most emotional thing ever.
Hmm.
So he's like, listen to me, Murph, I don't want to have to go out like this. Like this is not how I want to leave you. She doesn't want to talk to him, and she's like, if you want to go, just go. Don't even waste your time trying to say goodbye to me. Like you're leaving me here.
And you know that he doesn't want to leave her, but also this is literally what he was born to do. Like he
Yeah.
just woke up that morning and found out that everything he's ever trained and dreamed of is not only possible, but they're dying for him to do it.
And his son Tom, they have such a drastic different relationship. You can tell. It's like, yeah, he wants to be the farmer. They have like a stone cold, like they love each other. They have a stone cold relationship where
Hmm.
they're not as emotional with each other. They're just like, okay, I'm
Yeah.
going away for a while and you take care of the house. He's like, okay.
Mhm.
But him and Murph have like a bond.
A very, very emotional. And Tom, by the way, did not know obviously at the time that Timothy Chalamet was Timothy Chalamet, but like
Yeah.
rewatching, I'm like, wait a minute,
Yeah, that's
that's
Timothy
Paul
Chalamet.
Atreides. What? When
Yeah.
did that happen? Why is he in this
Yeah.
movie for 2 seconds?
Because that's exactly what I said when I saw him. Like,
Hmm.
hey, Chalamet.
Yeah, what's he doing here?
But then what I love about the end of Act One is they blended it so perfectly is that he gets his gear and he gets into the truck and they're blending the countdown of the launch of the
Such a
spaceship with
good
him
scene.
driving
Yeah.
away and Murph comes running out yelling for him and he's driving away in the truck
He
and he's
looks to see if
crying.
she's there. Like,
Yeah, and it's an emotional wreckage because Murph has nothing now. It's like her father is gone because he was everything to her, and he's driving off and they're counting down the space shuttle at the same time. It's like, okay, this feels like the end. This is the last time they're going to see each other with the way they edited it together.
and I just love the shots of like where it's a POV where the camera is mounted on the vehicles that are moving. It's just such a cool look. And then to have that, like, because that's how you typically see the space shuttle launches, where it transitions from the truck to the ship, is just so cool visually.
And then that they don't waste time, right? They're not wasting time getting in the space shit and like their
Yeah,
suits.
no, yeah, and that's what you would think. You would expect in most movies. You're gonna okay, now we're gonna go there. You're gonna see them get in the ship. You're gonna see them get ready for launch, prepare, do the training montage. No, like it's just hard cut, and we're at the black
and we're
hole,
off.
like,
Yeah.
or the wormhole.
Because the movie's 2 hours and 50 minutes, so we got to get this thing moving.
Hmm.
But it doesn't feel
Yeah.
that long.
No, it doesn't at all.
And going into Act Two, this is when we first actually have in person contact with TARS, which
Hmm.
is the, how would you describe him? Like a computer robot? Like,
He's like an R2D2 that you can understand.
yeah. Yeah.
Um,
AI.
yeah, yeah. I guess to describe like what he is, he's a semi-sentient robot
Right.
military enforcer. That's what he originally was, but now he's basically just their he's their R2.
What I loved about this, I don't know if you caught this, but his first introduction with Cooper is he tells him, his whole deal. He's 90% honesty and
Hmm.
he's at 100% humor. He's all jokes, right? But then Matthew McConaughey tells him to turn it down to 75. It comes back at the end of the movie, and I think it's
Yep.
such a great callback. And what I was thinking when I was watching this, it's like I don't know if it is relevant at all because they were trying to discover the equation of gravity, how to get all this everybody off the ground. But then as I was watching, I was like, haven't they already discovered
So
the secret to gravity?
what I understood the concept to be is that it's not that like they understand what gravity is. He needed to discover a way that they could defeat gravity. Essentially, they needed to be able to um, move extremely large mass without having to have the equal amounts of thrust. Like they say later in the
Gotcha.
video, the only way humans have figured out how to go somewhere is to leave something behind, and they needed to be able to figure out how to get their ships off Earth without having to leave behind the insane amount of fuel it would take to get that. Like the huge boosters we have for our current rockets are to shoot a rocket that's 10% of the size of that entire thing. They need to move a ship that's already 500 times bigger than our rockets. You need a booster that's the size of like a continent to do that. So what they need to do is figure out so I don't understand the calculations of it, but they need to figure out a way to move that mass without the required amount of thrust.
Because what I pieced together with, the massive space station at the end is, and how it's circular, I figured how they piece together how they defy gravity in space when they're in the shuttle and they activate the spin. Like when they
Hmm.
spin,
Yeah.
they can actually walk around instead of float
Yeah, no,
because
they're
gravity's
definitely
not pulling.
creating gravity on the space station. And that's why they built them as giant circumference, like the same way of like a lot of science fiction ships have done that. But I think the issue with gravity is they needed to overcome the escape velocity of gravity to get that ship because they can't build it in space. So they need to be able to build it on the ground and then take off.
Gotcha. Okay.
Because like a lot of times like in like Star Trek or something, the in universe like logic is that these ships are too big to leave a planet, but they're built in space so they never have to leave the planet and escape that like insane amount of thrust. But at this point in human history they can't build it out there. Like they can barely even build it in secret underneath the ground.
That makes more sense.
That's how I
I was
understood it.
trying to piece. I'm like, they already discovered it. They just have to,
Yeah, no, they
spin.
yeah, yeah. No, they can create it, but they can't get it out into the atmosphere.
Gotcha. So from here, we have the enemy introduced as time. As they go through their process, they go to sleep, right? They get put into hypersleep because they have to be slingshot around Mars and into Saturn. It's going to be like
Hmm.
8 months of travel, but they're going to wake up having not aged a day. And throughout that time, we get, Matthew McConaughey waking up, and there's so many messages that have been left, right?
And it's a good way to kind of advance the emotions while he's not physically able to be in the same space as
Right.
them.
So at this point, his son is still, a teenager. Only, a year has gone by,
Hmm.
and we discover that to get to the other galaxy, you're going to have to travel through the black hole. And what I loved about this scene is it connects to the end again, and it blew my mind again, even though I've already seen it, is when
Hmm.
they're traveling through, and then you can see the little bubble in the corner that's happening in the side of the spaceship, and Anne Hathaway,
Hmm. And you see
she
that
you can see it next to her, and
disturbance.
she, yeah, the disturbance, and I'm like, oh my god, and she touches it, and she's like, I'm touching somebody from the other side, because at this point we still think aliens are a
Yeah,
thing,
we also think that it's an alien being that because that's what's happening,
right?
and it just plays so well into once you've seen the movie, you realize that you can watch it forwards and backwards because time is irrelevant, and you're seeing events from the other side of the camera.
They get to a point where they finally reach the other galaxy, and there's 3 planets they can go to that have feasible options for them to live. throughout like watching, I was like, why didn't they just go to the one they knew had, Edmund, right? His planet had, they told his planet was received that,
Yeah, I think
but
it
again,
was
it's the farther away, right?
it was
It's
a
not the
matter of
closest
fuel
one,
because originally they believed they could hit them all with the fuel that they had and make it back to like to Earth, or at least that was what Coop wanted. And so, yeah, if they'd done it backwards, they probably could have hit all three, but they might have taken so long that they wouldn't have got back in time.
right? Because the first planet is a major hiccup, and he discovers that 1 year down there is 7 years in the real world, or 1 hour down there. Sorry,
Yeah,
1 hour down there is
because
7 years in the real
the
world.
insane force of the black hole just distorts everything around it.
One of their members of the team, he clearly doesn't want to plan. He just wants to go down there. Matthew McConaughey's like, whoa, whoa, what are we? This is serious. We have to come. We can't just go down there and lose 7 years of our life. And he's like, there's more to life than this mission, right? I think because Matthew McConaughey is still in Plan A mode, right? He needs to save his family and he needs to save the planet. And so they finally go down there, and it's one of the craziest looking planets I think I've ever seen in a
Yeah,
film.
it's
It's all
just
water.
yeah,
But I feel like behind the scenes, I feel like they made a tank, a shallow tank for, then they just kind of extended it in post, like to make the whole planet look massive.
and then they could have the water effects with the waves coming in, and
What's crazy is that the water was so shallow for them, but like the wave was the size of a planet.
yeah, it's because I think like when he was talking about with the swells, the wave
Yeah,
is so big because it's sucking up the water that would normally be here.
gotcha. And then so at this point, there's a lot of problems that happen because they find out the ship that they were looking for has been totally destroyed. And the way the planet works, it would have happened minutes earlier before they got there.
Because of the time dilation, it actually yeah just happened.
The time happens faster than they thought, and Anne Hathaway is so far deep into this planet looking for stuff. He has to send TARS to go rescue her because the wave is coming,
Yeah, they'll
and now
never make it out.
yeah, they're not going to make it out of there, and they actually don't. And Anne Hathaway has to break it to him that we lost another amount of time because they didn't get out.
Even if they'd left right when they were supposed to, it still would have been 7 years. And now that they've burned out their engine, they got to wait for it to dry out so they can leave. It's yeah, the amount of it's they're going to be there for so many more hours, and obviously the stress of the time dilation is even stronger than they realize because ship only crashed minutes ago.
I love anytime you mentioned this earlier when they position the camera on the outside of the ship. It makes
Yeah,
everything seem so
it's
real.
just such a cool shot. I even going back to like one of the old Halo games. I love to do that for their cutscenes, and it just looks so cool. You don't have to do anything besides mount it on the vehicle, and it just gives it such a
It's like
great
Top Gun.
aesthetic. Yeah, just
Everything
mount it
makes it
right on
seem
there.
real, right? It doesn't, because it's not a wide shot. You're not compositing a whole ship into this galaxy, which they do later, and it looks incredible. But like, it really makes the tension
You
and
will
up
feel like you're
closeness of,
on there because yeah, you're attached to the ship. The vibrations, the shake, yeah.
so yeah, they get up to the ship, and then Rawlings is there, and he looks old, and they're like, they realize how much time has passed, and then Anne Hathaway tells them that it's been 23 years, 4 months, and 3 days. At this point, he's like, what did I even sign up for? Like, what did I do this for?
I just lost the life I had with my daughter. Like
Yeah. And then at this point, we get one of the greatest acting performances in this movie is when he's watching his life back, right? His kids have
yeah,
now,
he's
his son has a
watching
child,
everything flash before his eyes and all the things he's missed.
and he's bawling. And then he finally gets one from Murph, right?
And then the change it has where and then it cuts through the screen to her was amazing. But like even when you think about like the acting he conveyed there was amazing, but realistically this guy 2 hours ago his daughter was 7
Yeah,
and now she's like because it
30.
really was maybe 2.5 hours in his world since he left the ship and now came back.
And the only reason she recorded a video is because of what he told her before he left.
Yeah,
And that's when she knew he wasn't
the
coming back, is when he
promise that
said,
he made.
when I come back, we might even be the same age. And that's
Yeah.
when everything broke down for her. And so she
Mhm.
only recorded the video because she was now his age.
Basically out of spite to be like, listen, you lied to me.
This whole movie is about a lie. And we get into that later when she realizes her father didn't actually lie to her because he didn't know the
Yeah,
real plan.
he didn't know what he was signing up for. He didn't realize that this was going to be the case, and
And so at this point, they have to make a real decision. it's one planet or the other. They don't have enough to go to both.
Yeah, so it's like, do we take the one that seems that you want to go to because of your connection, but it's a worse call logically? But then also, it's hard to falter because Coop is making all of his decisions based on trying to get back home because of the love he has for his daughter. So now you discover that she's been also having this ulterior motives, and it's like, well, is it any different than what Coop has been thinking?
Right. And this is when we get introduced to the concept of love can travel through dimensions and galaxies. And yeah, you don't, there's no, it's not like time or gravity where it's affected. Love transcends everything. And that really plays into the ending. But they choose to go to Dr. Mann's planet because a signal was, sent out to them. And then there's actual, thinking there's life there. And we don't know if, Anne Hathaway's love has passed
It
on or
may
there's
or may
actual.
not work, but we have actual current data that says you should go here.
And this is when they finally drop down to that planet, and we get the secret cameo that I don't think releasing, no one even knew was happening because he didn't show
I
up to the
saw it in
premiere.
theaters and we were like, what?
Yeah, and the cameo, Dr. Mann is Matt Damon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, didn't see that one coming.
Yeah, they wake him up and he starts feeding them information that, on the surface, like their planet is beautiful and it's
Hmm.
cold, but
Yeah, he's
underneath,
making up
like,
for because obviously they're gonna land there and be like, "Are you telling me this is home? It's a frozen wasteland." He's like, "Oh yeah, yeah. Well, don't worry. Like once we get to this part, it's you wouldn't even imagine."
yeah. And what I loved about them going into this planet is like the clouds, everything looked amazing, all the scenery. But when they hit the one cloud and it was actually ice, I thought that was super cool.
I had a little fun fact about that too. That's like a so that the advisors who were involved with making the script wanted everything to be scientifically accurate. That was the one thing that they let slide because it was just that cool. Like you can't have a frozen cloud because it would no longer be buoyant enough
Be a
to float.
cloud. Yeah.
It would just sink. So, but they're like, it looks cool enough that we're going to give it to you.
Yeah. Visually, it's like
Yeah,
a standout.
it's worth the payoff. I mean, at this point, we're far enough into the story that I think that we can make a little bit of leniency for it doesn't have to be 100% scientifically accurate.
And this planet is the one that you see on all the posters of,
Hmm.
Matthew McConaughey
Yeah, this
standing
is
on
the
this
cover
frozen
art. Yeah,
wasteland. And so him and Matt Damon's showing him, he's like, okay, tell me about the planet. And they want to go to all the beacons that he placed.
he says he's found all these things. He's been doing research for decades, and he's has all these evidence of great finds that he's found there.
And then those two go out together. And this is when we get the turn. You feel like there's something fishy with him.
Yeah, right from the get-go, you have this, it's just a little bit off. He's been planning this for decades. Like this is a trap and he finally gets to spring it. Like from when he does a checklist of all the things that he needs to be able to find and even just down to like his speech is clearly like it's rehearsed. He's he's ready for this moment.
Even when, because he's in the aluminum, right, to keep him warm. It's like it's almost like an act. And so he takes his communicator out of. They're like miles away from the spaceship that they're on, and he takes the communicator and he pushes him over the cliff, right, and then they're both fighting and they're rolling, and then so he breaks McConaughey's visor and he's breathing in. It was the ammonia,
Pure
right? Pure,
nitrogen ammonia, yeah.
yeah. And he's crawling around, and Damon's giving him a speech as he's walking away because McConaughey can hear him, but he can't communicate back. And at this point, we get a vision of McConaughey's communicator that was
Yeah.
he tossed off earlier. So he
So
crawls
out
over to
of
that.
focus. Yeah.
Yeah, and then it gets in focus, and he crawls over to it, and he yells back to Anne Hathaway, and he's like, "Yo, he's coming back to the ship. Like, get out of there." Anne Hathaway books it, but then Rollins is in
Yeah.
the
He's at the
Damon ship,
camp.
and he's messing with TARS and his broken
Yeah,
AI.
and they're like, "Why? This makes no sense. Why is it like it? One thing to strip it for parts, but it's like actively trying to fight against us. What is? Why are we locked out here? It should just be as simple as turning the light switch back on.
Yeah, and
What's
then they find
happening?"
out that his plans aren't correct, like he's been lying, and then he puts his fingerprint on to unlock all of the thing, and then that's when it activates the massive explosion, right?
Which is why it's been locked out because he's rerouted it to become a bomb
Because if anyone did show up to find out to study
and
him while
found
he
out
was
he was
asleep,
wrong. He needed to and he would have assumed that it would be a multi-person team because he understood the plan. It wasn't going to be a single person coming to pick him up. So he was going to have to kind of like isolate and conquer.
and we get a crazy scene. Goes back to the soundtrack of
Oh yeah, the soundtrack on this art is so good.
he's running around, he's trying to he doesn't know how to latch on to the spaceship
Yeah,
because
he can't
usually that's
dock.
somebody else's job.
That would be the computer or it would be the pilot, and he's neither one of those. I thought this was such a cool callback too to when they talked about how Tars disabled the auto thing. He's like, well, yeah, well, apparently I'm
90%
less
honesty.
trusting than you are. Yeah, which was just like such a cool callback.
Humans have so much more trust than computers, so it just shows that Tars is really, capable of having full intellectual thoughts and conversations.
He understands that this could be a trap, and so he's like, I'm not trusting you. I'm trusting my crew,
He's like, I know what I would do if I was in this situation as an AI, right?
and so I'm gonna assume the worst of you until you prove me otherwise.
And the music is swelling, and he's giving him a speech. And mid speech, he pulls the latch, and everything goes silent, and there's a massive explosion. And then she's still trying to talk to him, and then they both see the explosion from their point of view, and they're like, "Oh my god! Like our ship is destroyed." And they're like, "What do we even do? Because this is our only way anywhere, right?"
And Coop just immediately picks up on what he's got to do. There's no like thought, hesitation. He's just like, okay, all right, go.
The whole ship is spinning. It's like we have to Tars match the trajectory of the spin cycle so we can deal with the situation, right? So they end up latching on. Crazy scene. Again, they use the cameras on the outside of the ships, and it looks like I don't know if these were miniatures or not, but it looked so
It's
real.
got to be simulate like the way that they're like the tiny movements. Like it's something that I don't know if you could actually physically film. It's so well done.
And the silence of the whole scene. It's because even I believe it was silent when they were trying to lock onto the ship too.
So I think that from what I remember, there's only sound when you're inside the ship, like from the pilot's perspective. Every other part is silent because I remember that the sound floods back as they get actually latch on and open up their airlock. So I think that all you get is just the radio version of things and the outer space.
They finally lock on and they get into the ship and they realize from what Rollins told McConaughey because he spent so much time studying the black hole while they were down there is that there's some way for them to like travel like through the horizon of it, right? In order to he needs someone to go in to get the data. McConaughey is thinking about this and he's inputting his plan. We're now into act 3 and they have Tars and they have Case, the other AI robot who's with Anne Hathaway, and they have 3 different ships. So they're going to pull this slingshot maneuver to save fuel. They use Gargantuan to save the fuel so that Anne Hathaway can make it to that other planet. But what Anne Hathaway doesn't know is that McConaughey has a
McConaughey's not
plan,
not going with her.
and he's not going. But the one thing is, she knew Tars, the ship that Tars was in. There's 3 different ships that were happening that Tars was going into the black hole to calculate all the data. But
Hmm.
she did not know that McConaughey was also dropping off because their weight of the ship had to be light enough for her to be slingshot around. And that's when they bring back the line, I got 90% honesty. He's like, I didn't, they bring back that whole 90% thing. And I was like, that's such a great callback because, Tars pulled that on him and that's his relationship with Tars. But now to complete the mission, he knows that he's never seeing his family again. But in order to save the planet, he thinks this is necessary. And
This
he
is
just,
the only way he can save his family is to give this information to them.
and he withholds that 10% truth of what's actually happening. And this scene is absolute insanity of him
Oh,
going
when
through the
he
black
drops
hole.
into the black hole, yeah, the effects on it are just crazy.
Even in the ship, like everything is going crazy, and he's trying to communicate with Tars, and all of a sudden the gravity of the black hole is tearing the ship apart, and there's particles flying, and he gets ripped open, and then he's just floating in space in this black hole, and then we get one of the craziest looking scenes, which is what I think some people found confusing at this point in the movie.
Yeah, and I remember watching it in the movie. I'm like, what in the world is going on here?
He
Like,
gets sucked into the black hole, but it's in like a 4 point dimension.
well, yeah, it's inside of this black hole is a space that the
They
future
created,
people,
right?
yeah,
And we finally figured out his space, his 4 point dimension is the other side of the bookcase. He sees time every year of his daughter's like life through this other side of the bookcase, and he's seeing the points. He's like, "Oh my god, it was me that was communicating. Like, I was the ghost." And he finally realizes that they are him, right? They are the
they
future
are
people.
us. Yeah, it's a closed loop. Like this only happened before because it is destined to happen now because we eventually create this occurring.
Another great acting scene is when he's trying to communicate with Murph, and he kickstarts the first ever anomaly
Hmm.
for,
Yeah,
the
because he
ghost.
has such a strong emotion. He just is just like he's not trying to scare her with the books. He hits it out of pure frustration, and then that kind of sets off everything. That knocks off the lander for her, and then he does begin to piece together that, well, I didn't mean to do that, but I could do that intentionally.
And then he's talking to Tars at the same time because Tars is trying to communicate with him, and he gets in contact. And this is when McConaughey says, it's love, Tars. It's like my love for Murph is the reason why this is all happening. And it's like he sees himself come into
To
Murph's
leave.
room to leave, and this is when another killer performance. He's telling her to stay. He's like, tell him to stay, Murph. He's like, tell him to stay, and he's crying on the other side of this bookcase, and he's then he smashes the other side, and then that's when that one book falls. When McConaughey like turns back, it's like, oh, maybe he might stay, and then he goes away. And he at that point he's trying to find out how to relay this information to Murph, because Murph he realizes that they weren't trying to get him. They were trying to get his daughter, right? She's the key. We get to the point where we're in the future now. We're in the present time with Murph, and she's going back to Tom's house, which is the farmhouse that they grew up on, and Tom's living there. But the son is so far gone, he doesn't see
Yeah, and
anything other than the
he's
farm.
not trying to be evil. He's just so scared and unwilling to accept anything that he's like, no, it's like pure denial. Like this, we're fine, nothing is wrong. Like we have to stay here. Why are you leaving? Like,
Well, she leaves because he tells her to get out of the
yeah,
house.
she goes and then just
She
realizes
leaves.
that she can't live with that.
Yeah, and she sets the cornfield on fire to distract him, and then she books it back to the house to go see that room one last time because she thinks there's something there. And she's trying to piece it all together, and she finally clicks, and she has that, the one tear, and she's realizing that it's her father.
It has to be. Like,
It
yeah,
has to be, because we find out right before this scene, she's meeting Dr. Brand because she's been taking care of him all this time at NASA, that he lied to her,
yeah. That there was never any option for Plan A.
and she wanted to know, did my father know? But he said, I don't know what he said before he passed, but the daughter knew ish, or like somebody knew, man
No,
knew,
no,
but like she
yeah.
didn't know.
Hmm.
Now her whole world that she's been,
Yeah,
living is a
literally
lie.
since she was a child, like because she was like after Coop left. This is obviously like how her life evolved. So since she was a child, she's been working towards this goal of believing this was possible, and now has just been told that your entire life was a lie.
She's been angry with her father for abandoning her this whole time, but yet it was out of his control. Like even he got lied to. And so she finally pieces it together in the room, and then she grabs the watch one last time that he gave to her before she left, and he's communicating with Tars. He's like, how am I going to do this? And he realizes he can
He can affect the
communicate through the
world.
watch.
Yeah. But like I can't write down this data for you, but I need some way I can pass it on. And that's he's already established the binary because he made it for himself.
But the watch is more Morse code, right? It's with the ticks and the one,
It
two, two.
was, sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
I was thinking it was, yeah. But he needed the binary so that he could yeah, because you couldn't do binary for that type of information. But
Because
yeah.
the whole beginning of the movie, they both thought it was
Morse code, but it was
Morse code,
binary.
but then
Yeah.
he discovered it was binary. But this, because he knew that she has been studying Morse
She
code forever,
understood it.
she
She
would know
would
it.
pick up on it.
So Tar starts sending him all the data, and he starts clicking it to the watch. And I love the shot of it behind the bookcase, and you can see how they have the lines of like kind of sand or like the light reflecting,
Hmm.
and you can see the
It actually pulling the second
yeah,
hand back. Yeah.
yeah, it's so cool. And he's like tapping it. He's tapping the light stream of behind in the black hole, and he's tapping it, and it like moves like it's almost like it's like they look like violin wands in a way with like
Yeah.
see through, and he's tapping it, and then you can see the watch hand just start
Yeah.
flicking, and
It's
then
just the energy goes right into the hand
and she's about to walk out, and she looks down, and she sees the second hand ticking, and
ticking,
she's like,
and she immediately knows
that it's him.
that that's what that is. Yeah.
Yeah, and she's like, "Oh my God, it's been you the whole time." He's done his job, and now he's just floating in a black hole, right? And we flash forward. She's back at NASA, and she's throwing papers. She's
Yeah.
finally discovered. She
She
wipes out.
realizes that she has the information that they needed.
Yeah, and she clean slates the whole chalkboard. It's like
Yeah.
all this
It's
data is
done. It's
useless.
yeah.
We go back to Cooper. He wakes up. He's just floating in dead space, and it's like time passes, right? And it's enough time for them, the new Cooper station to come pick him up, and he wakes up in the hospital, and he's like,
Yeah.
Where am I?
Like, what happened?
And
Was
then
this all a dream?
yeah,
What's going on?
and they tell him he's at Cooper Station. He's like, "Oh, it's nice of you guys to
Yeah,
name something after
name
me."
after
He's
me.
like, "No, no, no, this is after your daughter, sir."
I think that's when I realized that Cooper was his last name.
Yeah.
Because the
Oh,
whole movie,
yeah.
I thought that was his first name.
Right, because that's all they called him, right? Was Coop?
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. And then so we find out that his daughter is still alive and that she's on his way to see him, but she has to go through, light speed and be put to
Hmm.
sleep. And
Yeah. And at the time, you're thinking, like, okay, yeah, it's been like 20, 30 years. She's probably like in her 60s. Maybe she doesn't
yeah,
move around as much now. Like,
because we find out he's 120, right?
yeah.
He wakes
And
up, she's like,
so,
"Congratulations, sure, you're 120 years old."
yeah. So she's 95.
It was a beautiful scene. He walks in and everything is silent, right? And all these strangers are there. They're not strangers to her because that's her family, but it's strangers to him. They don't interact with him. It kind of like opens the sea. Like
Just, yeah.
they
It's just all
separate
of a
and then
sudden,
it's
it's just the two of them.
him and Murph, right? And she finally sees him again and she just starts breaking down and he walks up to her and they hold each other's hands and they're, "I knew you'd come back," right? And it's like, "I knew you would save us." They have this whole beautiful conversation and she tells him parents shouldn't have to see their children die,
Yeah.
right? So she tells him, to go
It's time
see
for
Brand.
you. I'm glad you came back, but you also you have your own path now.
She sends him away on his mission to go back to Brand, to Anne Hathaway on that planet. With all the new technology they have, he has new spaceships. He steals a spaceship. He gets TARS, right? Because TARS is back at. They rebuilt his farmhouse in this new space station that's a sphere, right? It's crazy looking.
Yeah,
Like
it's
this
a
whole
Dyson
space
sphere.
station,
Yeah.
it's absurd. And so he's sitting there and he finds TARS and everything's the way it was, and he fixes TARS and they go off and they steal one of the spaceships. And so he takes it off, and that's when the one guy who's checking everything sees that one's missing.
Yeah.
And then we cut to Anne Hathaway's planet, right?
Hmm.
We know Cooper is gonna get there.
Yeah, but the wormhole. He's not just going to fly there and be there in 2 seconds. Like, that's his goal. But then we gotta go to what she's doing.
Her love of her life has we find out that he's passed. She's only been there minutes, right?
Hmm.
The way everything's been working, and she's still the same age, and she buries him, and we see she takes her helmet off, and we realize
We're
that this
home.
planet was the right planet, right? It's inhabitable. And then we pan over and she's got a whole station set up
Colony ready to
and
go.
a whole
Yeah.
colony ready to go. Like he's already, set up and that everything is ready for, Cooper to get there from them to start this new civilization. And that's how the movie ends. I turned to Adria and she's like, she was bawling. Right? She's like, "Oh my God, that's like just seeing the daughter again alone." Like,
Hmm.
obviously, if I were to watch this again in the future, when I have kids, like, obviously that'll hit way
It's gonna,
harder.
yeah, hit so much different than the first time you saw
But
it.
it already hits hard to begin with. Like Matthew McConaughey brought it in this movie, and Jessica Chastain, she crushes this whole movie.
Yeah. And it's crazy how much the young actor looks like her, and like she does such a great job too.
And just this whole movie, top to bottom, for 2 hours and 50 minutes, it flies by. But we're on the edge of our seat the whole time. Like
Hmm.
this
Yeah, it
movie is so
never
interesting.
drags.
So overall, final thoughts: this movie will remain in my top 10 forever, probably. I don't think there's a movie that'll ever kick it out of my top 10.
If I need a go-to space movie that's not Star Wars, like this is it.
It's more than just a space movie, right? There's relationships and it's grounded and there's stakes and it's more than just like, okay, let's go to the moon.
Yeah. Like you could theoretically transpose the core of it to underwater or even Earth. Like it's about space, but it's not just space, which is what you need to add that emotion that you connect to everything.
So I'm giving this like a perfect score. 5 out of 5.
I would say it's amazing. Like watching it again, I forgot how well the score just elevates everything about it. Like the editing was great, the writing was great, the way they tie everything back together. But like if you were to watch that movie with any like without music or with any other music behind it, it just does not have the same impact because it those scenes look amazing. But when you add that score to it and that tension and that like kind of techno, it just elevates it to a whole nother level. And I think that it was so well done.
I'm ready for the next one. Like Oppenheimer coming out,
Oh, so excited. Yeah.
that's going to be a good one. Like every couple years he comes out with a movie and I feel like You and me are always in the theater. Like it started with The Dark Knight,
I wasn't onto the Nolan train until The Dark Knight, yeah, and
but
then
then his previous movies like The Prestige and that
yeah,
kind of
I
stuff. It's like,
caught back up to things after, but
yeah, but Oppenheimer coming out soon. It's going to be great. I feel like me and you should see that together.
I think it's going to
We'll find a
be
way at
perfect.
some
Yeah,
point when we're down.
yeah, I
We'll
agree.
figure it out. For everyone listening, if you guys love this movie as much as we do, let us know in the
Yeah,
comments.
we'd like to hear what your favorite part is, and if you want to just spam us with Matthew McConaughey crying memes, that's good too.
That's good too. Yeah, all right, all right, all right. This has been a 2 hours on a Sunday podcast. I'm Brian,
I'm Ian.
and we'll catch you guys later.
Peace.